History has a terrifying habit of repeating itself, and economic empires are the clearest proof that the same mistakes return in new uniforms. Most people assume modern finance is too advanced to fail, but sophisticated tools cannot cancel basic incentives and human behavior. When we compare fallen civilizations, a disturbing pattern appears. Currencies follow a predictable four-stage cycle from strength to collapse. This is not ancient trivia. It functions like a roadmap that helps explain the current monetary trajectory of the United States. Understanding the cycle matters because the final stage is not a normal recession, but a systemic breakdown followed by a reset. Stage 1 is fiscal restraint and discipline, where money is tied to scarce value and government spending stays limited by reality. In this phase, growth comes from productivity, savings are rewarded, credit is cautious, and debt remains small relative to the economy. Stage 2 is expansion and temptation, when leaders discover they can fund big promises by weakening the discipline behind the currency. Spending rises faster than taxes, deficits become routine, and early debasement begins, often hidden behind technical language and politics. Stage 3 is crisis and desperation, where debt accelerates and central banks intervene more aggressively to keep the system functioning. Money printing becomes the default tool for every emergency, inflation pressures build, and public trust slowly starts to fracture. Stage 4 is collapse and reset, when confidence breaks, currency loses purchasing power rapidly, and a new monetary system is imposed. To see how this works in real life, we begin with the most famous historical case study, the long monetary decline of Rome. Under Augustus, Rome reflected Stage 1, using a high-purity silver denarius that enabled trade and funded roads, aqueducts, and stability. Sound money helped create the Pax Romana, an era where commerce expanded, markets functioned smoothly, and citizens trusted the coin in hand. As the empire expanded, military costs surged and leaders also demanded lavish public projects to keep political support and social order. When taxes could not rise further without backlash, rulers chose the Stage 2 shortcut, debasing currency to pay bills invisibly. Nero set the precedent by reducing the silver content slightly, a small adjustment that normalized the idea of cheating the currency. Later emperors accelerated the process, mixing in cheaper metals like copper while insisting the coin's face value stayed unchanged. The flood of lower-quality money raised prices, distorted trade, and quietly pushed Rome out of stability and deeper into monetary trouble. Emperor Diocletian tried to halt the spiral, not by fixing the money, but by forcing the economy to obey government price rules. He issued the edict on maximum prices, threatening severe punishment for merchants who charged above mandated levels, regardless of shortages. Predictably, shelves emptied, black markets grew, honest trade collapsed, and the state's controls strangled the economy further. Rome's fall was not only military, its economic heart failed first, leaving institutions hollow and society vulnerable to external shocks. Jump forward to the 20th century, and the same four-stage sequence appears again, this time in the catastrophe of Weimar Germany. After World War I, Germany faced crushing reparations, political instability, and a damaged industrial base that could not rebuild fast enough. Instead of painful austerity, leaders chose printing papier marks to pay debts, hoping speed and denial could replace real productivity. At first, the new money created a brief illusion of recovery. Wages rose, spending increased, and people mistook motion for prosperity. But currency supply quickly outran goods and output, and the economy slid into Stage 3 as prices began to race ahead. Inflation became exponential, where money lost value between morning and night, forcing people to spend instantly just to keep up. Everyday items turned absurdly expensive, and the pricing chaos made planning impossible for families, businesses, and even the government itself. Cash became so worthless that burning stacks for heat sometimes made more sense than buying firewood with currency. Savings were erased, the middle class collapsed, and social anger made citizens vulnerable to radical promises and political extremism. This is not only history. Modern Venezuela shows the same logic, even with massive oil reserves that should have guaranteed prosperity. When oil revenue fell and spending promises remained, the state printed money rather than cut programs or raise sufficient taxes. Hyperinflation followed, prices exploded, and currency credibility died, turning a resource-rich nation into a humanitarian emergency. Stores emptied, medicine disappeared, and citizens carried huge piles of cash that could not reliably buy basic food. These examples show economic laws behave like gravity. You can ignore them temporarily, but you cannot negotiate the landing. Now we shift to the United States, because the dollar is not just a national currency, it is the global reserve standard. For much of the 20th century, America resembled stage one, backed by gold discipline and powered by enormous manufacturing capacity. But in 1971, the United States severed the gold link, removing the constraint that limited printing and redefining global finance. This marked a clear move into stage two, where money could be created without direct backing and debt could expand faster than reality. Over time, borrowing became normalized, deficits became routine, and the gap between real output and financial promises widened. The system survived on reputation until 2008 exposed structural weakness, showing that leverage and risk had quietly accumulated for decades. Instead of allowing bad bets to fail, the Federal Reserve escalated into stage three policies to prevent immediate collapse. Quantitative easing created trillions to purchase assets and stabilize markets, effectively replacing natural price discovery with central support. Officials framed it as temporary emergency medicine, but the deeper truth was that the patient could no longer function without it. Like addiction, each round required larger doses, and the economy learned to depend on cheap credit as a permanent feature. Then 2020 arrived, acting as a catalyst that accelerated the cycle, pushing the monetary engine into overdrive under crisis conditions. Massive stimulus and monetary expansion flooded the system, and the scale was so large it changed the environment for years. When money supply surges far faster than production, the hidden cost is paid through purchasing power loss by workers and savers. Inflation is not merely higher prices, it is the silent transfer of value from stable holders of currency to the issuer of new units. The predictable result was the highest inflation in decades, crushing budgets and forcing families to cut essentials or take on more debt. Central banks then faced a trap. They must fight inflation, but the system is built on low rates and constant refinancing. Raising interest rates is like removing oxygen from a room. It slows growth, but it also exposes who is surviving only on cheap debt. As rates rose, bond values fell, and institutions holding long-duration assets suffered losses that could not be ignored forever. Bank failures signaled distress, showing how quickly confidence can flip when depositors fear the system's foundations are unstable. The Fed walks a tightrope: tighten too much and trigger cascading failures, loosen too soon and reignite inflation expectations. This is the doom loop, where every solution creates a larger problem, and each rescue increases future fragility. Meanwhile, debt interest costs surge until servicing the debt competes with major national priorities, exposing fiscal math that no longer works. In practical terms, insolvency appears when a government borrows to pay interest on existing borrowing, rolling obligations forward endlessly. History suggests two broad outcomes at this scale: explicit default or implicit default through inflation that reduces debt in real terms. An outright default would shock global markets, destroy confidence in contracts, and could freeze trade and finance across borders overnight. Inflating the debt is politically easier because citizens experience it as prices rising rather than a visible bill in the mail. That is why politicians tend to prefer inflation, because it spreads pain gradually and allows blame to be shifted or disguised. This is how stage 4 begins, with the old system losing legitimacy until a reset is presented as the necessary solution. We already see groundwork for a reset in the development of central bank digital currencies, often promoted as modernization and safety. A CBDC is not merely digital cash. It can be programmable, trackable, and tied to rules that can be changed centrally. In a programmable system, authorities can restrict purchases, freeze accounts, or impose spending deadlines, all without physical cash escape routes. After a crisis, a digital token can be offered as rescue, but rescue can also mean new controls over personal financial freedom. Unlike Romans trapped in their system, modern people can access tools outside centralized control if they learn early enough. Decentralized networks created the first digital store of value that cannot be debased by printing and is difficult to seize at scale. Historically, when currencies fail, scarce assets become lifeboats because scarcity resists political promises and preserves value across resets. That is why capital often moves into real estate, precious metals, commodities, and digital scarcity like Bitcoin during uncertain eras. When the music stops, paper promises can reprice brutally, and the public realizes that confidence was the real backing all along. The shift from stage 3 to stage 4 often happens slowly, then suddenly, and the sudden moment is what destroys the unprepared. We are in the slow phase when inflation lingers and debt climbs, but the sudden phase can arrive through crisis or policy shock. You cannot reverse the cycle once the structural damage is deep, but you can reposition to reduce exposure to fragile money. Wealth transfers occur in every reset, rewarding the informed and punishing those who trust comforting narratives over hard arithmetic. The next depression may be inflationary, meaning money exists everywhere yet buys almost nothing, creating scarcity in daily life. The Federal Reserve swings between tightening and easing show instability because the system now requires constant intervention to survive. Each intervention increases distortions, inflates bubbles, and makes the eventual correction more violent because delayed consequences grow larger. Long-term debt cycles often end after decades, and when they end, societies face restructuring that feels unthinkable until it happens. The reserve status of the dollar is also challenged as more countries seek alternatives for trade settlement and strategic independence. When trade shifts away from the dollar, global demand for dollars can fall, reducing the ability to export inflation abroad. If demand softens while supply continues expanding, purchasing power mathematically declines, and savings lose value even if account balances rise. Information is widely available now, so ignorance becomes a choice, and history provides enough evidence to see the pattern clearly. Those who expect government to fix the cycle may be left holding devalued currency when the reset finally arrives. For those who prepare, volatility can become opportunity, but only if they understand risk, time horizons, and what cannot be printed. Education is the primary weapon, because once you see the difference between currency and money, you recognize what is fragile and what endures. Currency is a medium of exchange that can be created in unlimited quantities, while money is a store of value that resists debasement. We may be transitioning from an era of easy currency back toward harder money principles, and transitions are always unstable and political. Do not wait for official confirmation of crisis, because institutions announce breakdowns only after the public can no longer avoid them. Look honestly at your portfolio. Are you concentrated in assets tied to printing, or do you hold finite assets and useful skills? The next great downturn is not a remote possibility. The trajectory is built into arithmetic if debt growth outpaces real growth. A depression describes the broader economy, but individual outcomes differ dramatically depending on preparation, flexibility, and exposure. By opting out of fragile systems where possible and building resilience, you create a lifeboat for yourself and your family. The era of easy money ends with a bill, and the bill arrives through inflation, taxes, austerity, or restructuring of promises. The key question is whether you will be surprised by the reset or ready for it when narratives change overnight. The choice is yours, but the clock keeps moving, and history does not pause for anyone who refuses to look at the pattern.